Quote-unquote Kavod Yahweh Kadosh Israel, Selah. Today's topic is the Hebrew cycle. Something I think I've coined is called the Hebrew cycle, which is basically this time period between the generation that builds versus the generation that destroys, and then a generation that has to build all over again. I think we're about the third generation, fourth generation in the kingdom now. And you can see that there's this generation that is, I won't say hell-bent, but there's pretty adamant action taken to not make the kingdom what it needs to be, you know? And I think what our goal as community members, as Hebrew Israelites, is to shorten that length of time between the people who build and people who destroy, and also shorten time between the people who destroy and the people who rebuild. And I think one of the ways we can do that is, one, instilling the responsibility in each individual that is their responsibility to build, also maintain, but also limit the destruction. And so sometimes the goal isn't to stop the bomb from going off, because to some degree that's impossible. Sometimes I think the goal is to minimize the collateral damage that is affected by the blast of that bomb. And that might seem wrong to some, that might seem that it's not what we need to be doing, what we're supposed to be doing, but I think it is. I think the goal of my generation is to build the kingdom using the building blocks that we got from the past generation, but also teach the next generation after us how to maintain that, and tell them it's a responsibility to not let things get too out of hand. Because if we build the generation, if we build the kingdom, if we rebuild the kingdom, and not necessarily rebuild in a way where it's like tearing down what was, just rebuilding as in reinforcing what is and building what needs to be. That's when I say rebuilding. That's what I think our goal is for the kingdom. But we have now a couple generations, I think between 2, 3, 4, if we're lucky, generations before, my great grandchildren are gonna have to take on the responsibility that we're taking on now. And I think that Hebrew cycle is one that every culture, every civilization goes through. But I think our cycle is very important. Not to say that everyone else's isn't, but to say that when you have a world that's, hell-bent on, promoting evil, promoting promiscuity, promoting, prostitution and gluttonism and, these 7 deadly sins, let's call them, there has to be somebody on the forefront going, hey, no, we're not standing for that. And I think one of those people, one of those civilizations, one of those groups are Hebrew Israelites. And I do think that having Hebrew Israelites as, one of the forefront speakers on those topics, it makes it tough. But it also puts a responsibility on those Hebrew Israelites. You can't mess up too bad or things start falling apart. I think that's to some degree the responsibility of a parent. There's this fine line of things you can do that can shape this human being to be okay, to be great. But there's also this fine line between like, this is good and this is just horrible. And you have this degree of like this safe space of messing up, And I think that allows for the humanity in everybody to exist, because nobody's perfect. Nobody's raising the perfect human being. That's impossible. Because you have to be perfect to create something perfect. But I also think that imperfection is what gives them that unique edge over everybody else. So I don't think perfection is the ultimate goal. But back to the Hebrew cycle, I think in the imperfection that everybody has in the community, in the kingdom, it creates that future generation. It's kind of like you create the villain you're going to fight in the future, or your grandchildren are going to fight in the future. You can't not create that person, because if you don't do what you're supposed to do, that person is created ultimately, but also at a larger scale. Because instead of the future is happening now. But when you are doing the best you can, it automatically has to create that opposite force. You're creating the villain for, future guy, but that's their fight. And that's what makes life worth living. That's what makes being a Hebrew worth it. Because you have something every day that you have to fight towards, against, with, so on and so forth. And it makes it, it makes it an adventure. And it's an adventure that's pretty scary to go through. And you can't go through it alone. And you see, some Hebrews who go out and they try to join the enemy, let's call it, to some degree. They're the guys after Yeshua died who went and joined the Romans. But you can tell there's this look in their eyes. It's a bit lost. I've had that look before. But the thing is, in the last video I spoke about just being is enough to inspire. So I don't have to go out and preach in the streets of New York City and tell all the Hebrew Israelites they need to do better. I have to be better. Something my mom, my imam was telling me yesterday was, it's not your responsibility. It was a tough conversation because her ultimate goal was to not raise me with the same trauma she was raised with. To raise me, it might not have been perfect circumstances, but it's certainly better than the circumstances she was raised in. And that's tough to hear because you start to contemplate, what was it like? But the beauty and the blessing of the kingdom is you never know. And that's something we take for granted because we don't know. It's always easier to talk about the grass over there you think is greener because you've never been over there. People here, in Kenya, I find it funny how people talk about you a foreigner, you must have money and stuff like that. And they only say that from the standpoint of they don't know what it's like to be you, so they can only guess what it's like. But I would also argue, I wouldn't want to be you like you wouldn't want to be me, based on the information that I know. And I can only say that because I don't know. You know if that makes sense? I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. And it's tough because you can always wish that somebody did more, but it's okay, now you have the chance to do more. You're 21 years old, actually. You have the responsibility to do more. And what you do in your life dictates how that cycle goes in regards to the Hebrew cycle. And that's tough because it puts a responsibility on everybody. It's not me necessarily you have to. No. I have to do it just like Erakim, just like Netzaki, just like Emmanuel, Gambiel, Kaya, Adina. All these people out of my class, but these are just people I know, Naor. I like Naor. Great guy. But we all have that responsibility. And maybe what I'm called to do is greater or less than the guy next to me, but the greatest thing for the individual is to do the greatest thing for the whole. It's one of the greatest laws, universal laws ever. Because if we're all making cake and you're the baker, but I don't bring the sugar, oh boy. You're the baker, you have all the skills on how to roll it, how to do this, I put it in the oven, we'll take it out, heat. I've got sugar, right? My little menial task. My little menial task to bring sugar. I don't do that, now we don't have cake. We have cake, but it ain't cake. You know what I mean? It ain't cake. And so sometimes you have to realize that your little piece, that your portion, no matter how small, has a far greater impact on the world and the future than you know. And it's a responsibility to make that and to bring that into fruition. And sometimes, or most times, I would say most times that is tough and it sucks because, well, it's not supposed to be easy and it's not going to be easy. And sometimes you don't start off on on the beaten path. Sometimes you have to find your way to the yellow brick road. And sometimes that comes with a lot of unnecessary and, well, it seems unnecessary, circumstances and experiences that you wish you could have gone without. Most people would tell you, wow, that's pretty tough. But it's those circumstances that made you who you are now. And it's the scars that you got along the way that make you prepare for war. Because you know how hard their world is. And I think in regards to the Hebrew cycle, you need warriors. You need those people who are able to see that the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows, but still be able to take that responsibility on for themselves and go, no matter what, I'm still going to do it. Because my great-grandchildren aren't going to say what the kingdom was. They'll be praising what the kingdom is, because that's a sacrifice that, your Saba made. And that's cool. I think that's one of the coolest parts about being in the kingdom. You get to make that change. You get to make that impact on not just yourself, not just your parents, but people you haven't even met, people who aren't even born yet. I'm preparing you for a battle that you don't know exists yet. And I'm preparing you for it. I'm making sure that you know how to take care of business. And that's what I find to be the most important part about the Hebrew cycle, is to remind each other, remind each individual that this is far bigger than yourself. It's far bigger than me. It's far bigger than you. Anybody who ever watches this video, it's far bigger than you. This is for generations to come. And every 3 to 4, hopefully, generations, you have to take what was built and build better. And just the individual responsibility, I've said a lot now, I'll tell you what that is to make sure that the future generation has bricks to build that are far greater than the ones that you have. It's just move a little bit more up the mountain, The goal sometimes isn't to reach all the way up to the peak of Mount Everest. That's not the goal sometimes. Sometimes the goal is to just get far enough that you can help the guy under you and you can help the guy in front of you. And that's it. And that's the part to play. Seems easy. It's not. That's the responsibility. To make sure that my sons, my daughters, my great-grandchildren, they're far better in terms of along the way on that brick road, that yellow brick road. They're far more ahead than I am. So then their great-grandchildren can be far more ahead than they are. And some people might ask, where does the yellow brick road lead to? I would say everlasting life. And the spiritual and the physical. I think we spiritual beings living a physical experience. I don't know where the end of that path leads, but I do know that life leads to life, like death leads to death. And I think when striving for everlasting life, that can go in a lot of directions I don't know the answers to, but I do know it's life-giving, and that's something. And so the Hebrew cycle is to push forward the idea, the concept of everlasting life, as Ben-Ami stated, and to make sure that you pay it forward as much as you can at any level you can, because ultimately that's the responsibility of being a Hebrew Israelite, to make the world a better place by being a better place in the world. Have a blessed day. Yakai.